equality and diversity. Have we not heard enough of equality and diversity yet, Rory?
The answer to that is a firm no. And the reason for that is that, equality and diversity are so important. And certainly for people of my generation, I at the time of recording this, I'm hurtling towards being 64 years young. I can remember a time when it was a very, very bad time, certainly here in the UK, for equality and diversity, where people were dismissed because of disabilities, the colour of the skin, the religion, being a woman. I mean, I can still remember a time where women, when they got married, had to leave work. I mean, it just doesn't even compute that now, does it? And if you were a different religion, you're barred from certain jobs. And thankfully, we've become more progressive through the years. And really, one of the big punctuations of that, and I use the word very thoughtfully, punctuations, was the 2010 Equality Act in the UK. And the reason I use the word punctuations, it's usually a punctuation in a sentence is usually where you pause. And I think the Equality Act was a bit of a pause where people thought, well, we've done that now. We've got that legislation in. But of course, as we know, equality and diversity is progressive. And indeed, for those of you who follow the podcast, I interviewed Mahmoud Ahmed in podcast 182, where we talked about having specific diversity training, race and culture training. So it is current. And I think that it's not really good enough, certainly in our profession, just to fall back on that punctuation and say, well, we've got that legislation now and that's all done. We're all good. It's progressive, and we need to be very thoughtful about working with our diverse clients and indeed our colleagues.
Yeah, it's about. I always look at this and I think it's about us. It's about us as individuals and how we see the world. It's our frame of reference and how we get kind of challenged on that as we go through. We may get messages, and you were speaking about you mentioned your age there, Rory, and boy, are you looking good. And if anybody wants to see what Rory and I look like, you can catch our podcast. It is available on YouTube. Go to YouTube, put in Counselling Tutor Podcast, and you can actually see us doing it, and we can wave to you. I'm waving right now. Hello.
I'm waving too.
And I think that, we grow up and we get certain messages as we're growing up. We are people of our time. We develop our self-concept and our frame of reference based on what we are taught and the messaging that we are given. But as you say, Rory, that this is a progressive. I want to say progressive progression. I'm really. This is progressive in that it is. I think that we're becoming more and more educated about people, about rights, about equality, about diversity. And, I look to Carl Rogers and he speaks about that unconditional positive regard. And the word there is unconditional positive regard. Not if you meet certain criteria and you fall within certain boundaries that I myself find acceptable, then you get this. It is unconditional positive regard. And that's all it is. Equality and diversity, it can be a pretty dry subject when you're studying it as a student, specifically when you are looking to the legislation. Legislation is not written in the most entertaining manner. It can be pretty dry on the page, but at the end of the day, it's about acceptance and inclusion of all and just being open and warm. No matter who that person is, they are a fellow human being. Anything other than that is us putting a filter or a label on who that person is.
Yeah, and to be honest, Ken, I'm going to be really honest. When we're talking about race and culture, I feel a bit of a fraud talking about this because I'm a white older man, so my frame of reference is going to be completely different to someone whose skin color or faith position is different, because we're going to see the world through a different prism. Yeah. And moreover, the world is going to see us through a different prism, and I think that's something we need to think about. And one of the things that really, really strikes me is that, when you talk about progression, I think progressive progression. I think it's within all of us. It's an endeavor. It's something we should strive for. So we should all, take some time to think about, are we working in an inclusive way? What don't we know? And sometimes, you don't know what you don't know. Doing some training on race and culture or disability, or trying to, maybe I've read a number of books on feminism, which has given me a view to the world that I didn't have as a man. And I think it's really important that we build this into our CPD calendar all the time. It's just not something we tick off.
Mm.
And I'm going to be a bit controversial here, Ken. I think that first trainings maybe don't have the bandwidth to cover it in depth, to cover equality, diversity in depth. I don't want to be disrespectful to our colleagues who teach, who are working so hard in this, I know. But I think that they can sometimes be hampered by the curriculum because it's almost a course on its own, I think.
It is. And it's offered as a course on its own from multiple places. And, I really like that you touched on that. When I was speaking earlier, I was speaking about that value of inclusion. And that's a value you hold within yourself. But without the education that comes along with that, without informing ourselves, we can only see what we can see. Our vision, our frame of reference is blinkered by what we know. If you think about it, your frame of reference is everything you know, the experiences you've had in your life, who you are, your culture. And one of the big factors of that is your learning. If there's something that sits outside of your learning, it's not within our frame of reference often. And by doing continued professional development, by looking and seeking out relevant training, it expands what we can see. And inclusion, I guess, becomes it's tricky. I'm trying to find the words here. Without seeing it, we can be overstepping a line that we don't even know is there because we haven't educated ourselves. We can interpret something through our frame of reference and get it wrong when it comes from a client. We can say something that might be disrespectful, not meaning it, and that not being our intention, but because we don't see it, we don't know it, we don't understand it. And I think that's where training is so important, that continuing development in service of those that we serve. And I agree with you, Rory. In base training, look, it's woven through the whole of the curriculum.
It
is woven through the whole of the curriculum. We do know that, but it tends to just be the facts. It tends just to be that legislation. It tends to be just that look at your own values and have a think about that and journal about that. And I understand that we can't go into every one of the areas that are considered as the protected areas within the legislation, or even those that sit outside of that, because there'd be no space to learn counselling along that road. We talk about the update of that legislation, and since then, what has become popular is neurodiversity, which is not mentioned in the updated Equalities Act, and maybe that will be revisited again at a later stage, and maybe we'll see that progression, Rory, our new word,
yes,
as we go forward, and things are updated.
Well, I hope so. And of course, we've got a super duper handout for you. So all you have to do is to go to podcast 220, go to counsellingtutor.com, find the podcast tab. It's podcast episode 220. We've got a super duper handout waiting for you. And within that super duper handout, there's something called the Big Seven. And it is a alternative view and quite an authoritative view on equality and diversity. And the one thing they mention that isn't covered in the Equalities Act is class. And I think that's a big one. And it's a growing edge of being aware of, where you sit in terms of your own privilege. And it's something that I think we could do with looking at. Maybe we need some legislation around that to think about, get people to think about where they are in terms of the kind of, I hate to use the word hierarchy, but our society's built on them.
Yeah.
That's the problem, isn't it? Our society's built on hierarchies.
And it's interesting you mentioned class, because I found out about class when I immigrated to the United Kingdom. So I was born in the UK, but my parents immigrated away to South Africa when I was very young. And it's less less of a word there. I hadn't heard it in
Mm,
South Africa, but there again, there I was living in South Africa as a privileged white male at a time that was really, really tricky.
indeed.
And there were the challenges of that country that it faced at that time because of the apartheid regime. It was a really interesting. I can look back on my journey and see what messages I was taught in school. Looking around at a whites only school, and I'd come from the United Kingdom where it wasn't that way, and I was asking questions, and they were shushed. They were shushed. I was shushed. I was just
Yes,
told this is how it is. This is how it is. And it's interesting as a malleable child at the time. I went, oh, okay, then that's the way it is. But what's interesting is it was very different in South Africa. It wasn't about class, and of course, if we look to India, we might be speaking about the caste system and how
indeed.
and how that may work. So that this is so relevant to who you are, where you are, the client group you're working with, and the legislation you work within. I guess it changes depending on where we might find ourselves, but the basis of it remains the same. It's that open warmth, inclusion, recognition of a fellow human being.
Yes, and acknowledging, I think acknowledging difference. You know, the idea that, well, we're all the same. I'll treat everybody the same. I, it's a wonderful way of thinking, but actually, you have to make adjustments because people aren't the same. Their experiences aren't the same. In some cases, the way the law's framed isn't the same. And I will, as we move on from this topic, I'll leave you with this thought. Up until kind of November of 2020, if anybody asked me, what race are you, I said, well, I'll be English. I'm English, obviously English. I had my DNA tested. Mrs. Counselling Tutor bought me a DNA test for Christmas, and I did it. And it came back, and lo and behold, I'm half Irish. I'm a quarter Scottish and a quarter Welsh. I'm not actually English. And it's like, oh, I mean, I guess Rory is the clue in the name. That's quite an Irish name, isn't it? But it did leave me thinking that actually, I am diverse. Of course, it's a diversity in name only because I'm a white male, and the privilege that comes with that. But it's interesting to think that I started off thinking, oh, I'm obviously English, and now when the box comes to tick any forms who you are, my pen's hesitating, Ken. It hovers.
Yeah, and if you think about what you've just said there, because you have information and a view on who you are that you didn't have before you undertook that test, and there's the key, isn't it? That we inform ourselves, and when we inform ourselves, our frame of reference changes.